Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. Today, Maritza is leading a discussion of comparing three different philosophies on decision-making. So, Maritza, could you go ahead and introduce the topic?
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. Today, I'm going to give you key concepts for the philosophies of Stoicism, Taoism, and Transcendentalism. And then what we're going to do is talk about decision making through the lens of these three philosophies. They have some similar approaches. They have some different approaches. And so I'd like us to compare and contrast and kind of discuss how we can maximize our decision making by leveraging off of some points of these. So we'll kind of let the conversation go as it flows. I do have some things to start us off. Should I go ahead and start sharing, Shrikant?
Go right ahead.
All right. Let me,
So, folks, the purpose of the presentation is to put these thoughts on the table and keep track of all the notes, anything that you want to comment on on these three different approaches to decision making. And you can also talk about your approach to decision making and how it connects to these three once we're done with the presentation. So go ahead, Maritza.
right. All right, we're going to start here with Stoicism. And for Stoicism, the key concept is virtue. So, Stoicism looks at all of these, everything stems from a position of virtue being the highest good, and a decision should be only taken with reason. You should start with reason. So the worldview is Stoicism sees the world as rational and orderly, where individuals can achieve contentment by living in accordance with reason and virtue. So this is what they view as you have to put your foot forward with this idea. Taoism looks at it from an idea of harmony, and they're advocating for simplicity and even sometimes non-action. So the idea here is balance, right? So uh, Taoism views the world as a place of constant change and relative opposites. It promotes a way of life that is in harmony with the natural flow of the universe. For transcendentalism, we're focusing on intuition. That's what they advocate for. You should have a self-reliance, nonconformity,
Join the
and
meeting.
and you should be looking at individuals achieving higher states of consciousness. So transcendentalism is characterized by a belief in the spiritual over the material, the individual over society, and the importance of personal direct experience with the divine, often found in nature. So those are the three philosophies, just a very 1,000-foot level um, a overview of them. And here I have, for comparing and contrasting, I have a couple things I'm looking at. So we've got the approach to nature, individual versus universal, focus on inner life, ethical and moral guidance. Those are just four major branches that they both tackle, just in some different ways. So when we're looking at nature, Stoicism is looking, again, you're going to see the same themes over and over. Stoicism is looking at it from nature as a rational order to be understood, and then going to live in accordance with that. Taoism is using nature as a guide and its source for wisdom, because Taoism is putting balance and harmony as primary. Transcendentalism is putting, again, the individual growth as primary. So there's value here in personal discovery, and nature is the path towards finding that individual growth. speaking of individual, when we're looking at individual versus universal, both Stoicism and Taoism have universal principles, and they're looking at them for all humans, even though they're looking, one of them is looking at it as reason primary and the other one as harmony primary, but they are looking at universal principles. Transcendentalism differs from those two in that it's looking from the individual intuition lens here. So for inner life, um, and some of these, again, they're the same concepts, which is why I was just repeating it here. So we have inner virtue and rational control over emotions is what Stoicism is going to tell you you're focusing on for your inner life. Taoism is advocating for inner alignment with the natural flow. And transcendentalism is having you dive deep within you, looking at yourself and your individual spirituality. From the ethical and a moral perspective, Stoicism is telling us, again, the four virtues need to be your guiding light. Taoism is saying, again, balance. Balance is your guiding light for Taoism. So, you're on the ethical path if you're in balance. And transcendentalism is telling you intuition is what you need to most focus on. So we've got for Stoicism, reason should be your compass. For Taoism, balance should be your concept, your compass. And for transcendentalism, intuition is your compass. So now I'm going to go specifically into how they would view decision making. So for Stoicism, everything on this page is Stoicism, right? So they're looking at it from the perspective of decisions are based on virtue and reason. And Stoics emphasize making choices that are in harmony with nature and personal virtue. Um, the idea here is personal responsibility, self discipline, and moral integrity. For Taoism, decisions should align with the natural flow of the universe, which is the Tao, right? So they're saying you should be flexible, you should be intuitive, but um, allow things to flow. Harmony with nature and non-interference are key aspects of what Taoism is inviting you to focus on in your decision making. And a Taoist would observe the natural order of things, and their decision making would flow from a path that seems to follow naturally. Transcendentalism is going to tell you to focus on your individual intuition. So trust your own intuition, trust your own individualism, and in doing so, you're believing that others are doing the same. So you're trusting in the inherent goodness of people and nature. A decision from this perspective would be based on an inner sense of morality and intuition. And you're going to, again, put primary your personal growth and the spiritual connection. So these are, I kind of went through this kind of quickly, but just wanted to give you guys some higher level principles so that we can then together we can unpack it and sink our teeth into.
So, Marissa, what I was thinking of is like we have done previously with while comparing these three things, we've spent some time on each of them individually. So we flesh that out and then we go into comparison. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, yes. Yep. And that's the way the slides go as well.
Perfect. So we'll start with decision making based on Stoicism. So I invite people who are familiar with Stoicism to talk about decision making based on Stoicism. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to comment on decision making using Stoicism or anything that has been said about Stoicism. So we are not going to talk about Stoicism, then we are going to talk about Taoism and decision making under Taoism, and then same thing with Transcendentalism, and then we are going to start comparing those things. But initially, we are just going to try to say, okay, what is it? How does Stoicism approach What is Stoicism and how does it approach decision making? If you'd like to comment on that, go ahead and type an exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Go right ahead. Who'd like to start it off? Okay, let's start with DLJ, followed by Bill. DLJ.
Yeah, thanks. My sound working?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, all good on Stoicism. There's a couple of, I mean, if you're going to use it as the only way of making, I mean, point is you can use any of these, combination of these as your ways of making decision, right? We're not held to just one, right? But if we're looking at them individually, as we are, Stoicism, there's a couple of downsides potentially, right? So it says here's a number of virtues which we think are good, courage, etc. But of course, everybody, depending on their environment and the way they've been nurtured and so on, maybe even their DNA, may end up with different set of virtues, what they consider to be a good thing. You look around the world, you think, I can't believe some people use those as their policies when other people are using, yeah, you get it. The other one is the external world, which is the same criticism one can level at Epicureanism. The things that are not in your power to change it. Somebody famous once said the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. So if you've only got that internal view of the world, you're limiting your range a little, aren't you? But in itself, yeah, not bad. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. Next is going to be Bill. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like to talk about Stoicism and decision making. Go ahead, Bill.
Thanks. I'm in the park, so if the background noise is too loud, just let me know and I'll put myself on mute. So if the metric is what's a good decision, sometimes the methods people use to achieve good decisions are actually methods that are just helping them avoid bad decisions. It's like the flip side of the coin, you know? So in this case, with the Stoic set of criteria, like based on reason and virtue, I think sometimes the tools used to avoid bad decisions are like the laws of math and the laws of logic and the laws of kind of mathematized cost-benefit analysis. Like if one store offers a bag of apples for $10 and another store offers a bag of the same kind of apples, same number of apples for $9, you know, the numbers tell you, you know, don't go to the store that sells it for $10, go to the store that sells it for $9, you know? That's like, you know, using math and logic and cost-benefit analysis. So I'll stop there. I'll chime back in on the other philosophies, like what are their methods for avoiding bad decisions? And it might be a little different than math and logic and cost-benefit analysis. So thanks for listening, and I'll pass.
Thank you. Thank you. And the trees were very cooperative. They were very quiet. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mona, followed by Peter. Mona, go ahead.
I just have a just a small comment that I remember from reading Seneca's letters, and maybe that's because that's how my mind works and that's what I paid attention to. But it called to me that sentence that I found again and again. If you need to know what to do, look for nature, look into nature. So that's not at all different than what Taoism would suggest, you know, like look for nature, find yourself and how that reflects in the nature. So to me, everything feels like a reflection of something else, but nature is the key word that I wanted to bring up. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mona. Next up is going to be Peter. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Shrikant. This is going to be a very brief point, but because I know that Stoicism, not all along, but since I was introduced to this by some of my friends, as a mean to recover certain mental, let's say, struggles, right? There is some anxiety, PTSD, you know, all that kind of things. And one of the first things that I heard from him and to my own research is the word rationality, right? Stoicism and rationality has, you know, huge correlations. And of course, the definition other people have already said about it's more on the individual rather than the Tao's, the naturalistic or the nature. And so I just kind of want to say that I'm not a believer in, as compared to my friend, he believes that everyone can practice Stoicism, and I actually strongly disagree with him. And I told him that I think a person has to ideally be of a certain mental state, mental health, before they can even approach Stoicism, because the definition of rationality requires a calm mind, right? And if someone is going through, let's say, trauma, PTSD, CPTSD, whatever other names you can put on there, it would not only be it would not only be very difficult, but I would actually say that it's impractical. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Next up is going to be Srijan, Jane, Brian, and Maritza. Srijan, go ahead.
So yeah, I think Stoicism, I've always kind of looked at it as like you know, a mindset or a philosophy that's very much applicable when you're in some really excruciatingly difficult situations in life. I think, you know, some of the Stoics, like the ancient Stoics themselves, were prisoners or in very difficult scenarios in life, and Stoicism sort of becomes somewhat of a natural you know, tendency or mindset to gravitate towards. And you know, even in my own personal life, I've found Stoicism to be really useful when I'm in a, you know, a difficult situation where I kind of need to use a lot of rational thinking to be able to get myself out of that situation and not pay too much attention into like what the world is imposing on me, because I don't have much control over the external factors.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Srijan. It's very interesting. Lots of interesting points are coming up, you know, which of the methods are effective in what context, you know, using of multiple of these methods and how they, so we'll be going into all of that. Thank you, everybody. Let's continue. Next up is going to be Jane, followed by Brian. Jane.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I've been interested in Stoicism for quite a few years now, and I'd say it's a particularly practical kind of philosophy. So well suited to this particular topic of decision making. As has already been mentioned, the two principles that really come into play here are the virtues and very much as well the what is within your control and what isn't within your control. That's really fundamental, and it's something that I think in everyday life we can often get wrong, and we try to impact things that actually are not within our control, and it often doesn't end well. So that's really a major thing. As for the virtues, I think it was DLJ was saying, well, you know, different people have different virtues. Well, actually, I've had a bit of a slight disagreement with some Stoics just recently. So yes, there are the four virtues that Stoicism most definitely talks about, and out of the four, wisdom is probably seen as the sort of pinnacle, because in any decision making, you may not always need temperance, you may not always need courage or justice, but you will almost certainly have to use wisdom. So it's that out of the four cardinal, that's wisdom sits at the top. But a few years ago, I took part in Stoics Week, which is run out of Britain annually. And you're usually given some tasks to do every day. And on one particular day, the organizer was saying, well, these are the cardinal virtues. But of course, it doesn't mean to say that other virtues are somehow bad. I mean, you know, that's fine. And he actually encourages to make a list of our own personal virtues that we aspire to, other than the four cardinal ones. And he then was sort of saying, and write it down, put it somewhere prominent. He even suggested that you tattoo it on your body, which I have to say I didn't do. But I did write them down and put it in my wardrobe so I'd see it every day. And now I was mentioning this to a Stoics meeting a few days ago, and it didn't, I was quite surprised it didn't go down very well. And I think this might have been, I mean, I wasn't lambasted or anything, but I think it may be that sometimes when you find a philosophy that really suits you, we can go, in my mind, maybe a little bit overboard, and it's got to be stuck to absolutely, and you mustn't vary it. And personally, I'm much more of a pluralist, and find meaning and truth in not just Stoicism. I actually really like Taoism and a few other things. I'm an absurdist and all sorts of things, and so that's where I'm coming from. But you take it, what suits you. Thanks.
Wonderful, Jane. Thank you. Great comment. And we will explore all these themes. The idea of philosophy that suits you, idea of using multiple approaches. Maybe taking one idea from each philosophy, like let's say balance, or from Taoism, or dichotomy of control, and seeing how the other philosophies approach that same point. So there's just so much rich material here. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Maritza. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, it's really a simple question, just to aid my understanding here. Of the three philosophies you quoted, Taoism and Stoicism, very strong, very well accepted philosophies, and I understand why they're there. What puzzles me is transcendentalism. It seems to me it was never really accepted, isn't in common use these days. I just wondered why you put it in there.
Okay, very good question. And it so happens that Maritza is going next. So Maritza, if you could answer that question as well, along with whatever comments you have.
Oh, it's all the poet's fault. No, so transcendentalism is something that we have dived into here in the past on Comprehensivist Wednesdays, and we have found that there are points under philosophy that align themselves very well with several of the other philosophical works we've studied, and some of the and the focus on individualism speaks to me personally. I really appreciate a philosophy that finds the good, as it were, in making stronger individuals. That's kind of my platform. So that's why transcendentalism speaks to me. I guess I'm similar to Jane in that I don't have one philosophy. I don't believe one philosophy is the way. I believe that many of them, we are the richer for studying many of them. And so I have brought transcendentalism to this group in the past. So I wanted to bring it back into the fold. And because we're looking at three different angles, what was especially enticing to me for transcendentalism was the fact that it's not as well respected as some of the others. But if you'll see, I think by the end of today, you'll see that there are so many common points that you might ask yourself, why? Why is it not as respected? Because if it's touching upon many of the same concepts, it didn't have a good PR rep. So that's the answer to Brian's question. I just want to make a few comments. So many great comments, guys. And I had jotted down a couple kind of layman's terms things for Stoicism, and several of you have touched upon them. Like the one catchword I use for Stoicism here for decision making is I put it in the meetup description for you. This is the rational lens. So if we're looking at through what lens are we taking this decision making? When looking at Stoicism, the rational lens. So reason is primary here. And what that's looking at for you is it's saying, make your decisions from a state of calm and peace. Don't worry about outside judgment and be mindful that we are not always in control. In fact, a little bit more specifically is the locus of control, which Jane so nicely brought up for us. But those are just the higher points. But the two words I think would stand out here are, this is decision making from a rational lens, and primary is reason.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Okay, let's now go to Taoism or Taoism. Any thoughts about Taoism and how it approaches decision making? While, just a second, while people are lining up, I want to say my favorite capturing of Taoism is by Bruce Lee. He says, "Be like water, my friend." Next up is DLJ. DLJ, go ahead.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice here, because you could argue that Taoism, with its do nothing element to it, is almost the antithesis, isn't it? It's the it's the not making a decision, which in a way is making a decision, of course. No, I just wanted to chip in and just say I appreciate your write-up on this, because the last two words in the section you had on Taoism was natural order, and you didn't say sacred order, which some would. So we're talking about pre-first century Taoism, before it became a religion. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, DLJ. Anybody else would like to comment on Taoism and decision making? Bill, go ahead.
Okay. So I think here, one way to go with it would be to point out that the body has a way of signaling discomfort in response to a bad decision. Like if that bad decision produces, a bad situation that causes problems, And so if the watchword, if the metric that Maritza listed for Stoicism is intuition, sometimes that intuition takes the form of like a feeling in your gut, like a gut feeling, a feeling. After a decision has produced a bad outcome, that produces, some kind of emotional pain, disappointment, or whatever, guilt, shame, what have you. So this is a very different metric. The body's feelings is a very different metric than kind of the numbers I mentioned earlier and the rational logic and the mathematics. So I guess I would close this comment I'm making by mentioning something I heard in a meetup the other day. We were talking about happiness and, scientists who study happiness and how to measure it and stuff. And someone cited a study that said, actually, what people want is not happiness. They want three other things that make them happy. They want stability. They want healthy social relationships, and they want a purpose in life. And I was thinking, okay, what's the opposite of each of those things? Instability, alienation from social relationships, and directionlessness. And maybe the reason that they try to avoid those three things, instability, alienation, and directionlessness, is because it feels bad. Those things feel bad. So if Taoism has the metric of like, wait a minute, I might have misquoted it before. Maybe the metric for Stoicism is balance and harmony. Maybe those words balance and harmony refer to the body knows when it's feeling harmony and when it's feeling balance, and it knows the opposite, the discomfort, when it's feeling imbalance and disharmony, perhaps caused by instability, alienation and directionlessness. So these are it's a completely different set of metrics for measuring a good decision versus a bad decision. It's more emotional and bodily as opposed to mental and numerical and logical. So I'll stop there and be interested to hear what other people have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Next up is Mona, Srijan, and Katie. Mona.
Thank you, Shrikant. I wanted to say a couple of things. First off, regarding the idea that in Taoism, then there is no action. I don't think that's true. I think there is action. It's just that it doesn't come from the place of self-interest. So what Taoism advocates is harmony. And the idea that we are looking for good decisions or bad decisions, but that's from what perspective? Is it good for me, or is it good for the entire community or the world? Or so I think that it's more nuanced, and it's very easy to fall into this trap to say no action means I do nothing. I could do plenty of things that are good for the world at large without it needing to be necessarily good for me personally. So and it doesn't need to exclude me. So it's very complex, I would say, to decide what is good and what is bad in that way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Bruce Lee certainly does action. Next up is going to be Srijan, followed by Katie. Srijan.
So maybe this is more of a question. I think the impression I get from Taoism is that maybe it's sort of saying to live in the moment, and I think if you're following Taoism, then maybe you don't sort of think of the future or the past, or like sort of like sort of rational thinking and things like that. It's more so about like um, what your body is telling you, what your intuition, emotions are telling you, and you're sort of just being very present with how things are around you and how you are around things, and sort of acting in the moment. Would that be accurate? And that's kind of how I'm understanding it.
Excellent. I'll have other people comment on it as we go on, and we'll kind of slowly build the picture of Taoism. Maybe when we start contrasting it with Transcendentalism on one hand and Stoicism, it will get more very carefully defined. And next up is going to be Katie, followed by Jyoti. Katie.
Yeah, DLJ's do nothing thing got me thinking. I think I see Taoism as go with the flow. So it could be, I mean, it could be do nothing and just react to other people's, but I also think that it's not a one size fits all solution, that everybody has to have the same decision-making strategy.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next up is Jyoti.
Yeah, my take on Taoism is exercise modesty, lie low, like it compares it with the water, essentially. Lie low, don't compare, don't compete, and go with the flow. So that doesn't mean that you are not able to make a good decision because you are being modest, but you are going to make a decision that is good for people good for everyone. They are for those people who don't want to flaunt about themselves, but yet do move forward. So this is my take on Taoism.
Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is going to be Chain.
Hi. Yeah, my understanding of Taoism is not immense by any stretch of the imagination. So I hope I'm not giving wrong information. But one principle, as has been pointed out, of Taoism is the principle of Wu Wei, which translates roughly into non-doing, which sounds like, oh, I don't have to do anything. But that's not it at all. It's more like not forcing things. So while there's a saying which I can't quite remember, so this is a bit off the cuff, but it's something like to practice non-doing, but not to leave anything undone. So it's to go, I mean, standing in a river is a good example of you allow the river to take its course. You don't fight against it. And so you go with nature. So it isn't actually not doing, but almost like treading gently on the world. That's my interpretation anyway. So I hope I'm not too wrong there. I don't want to give out false information.
Well, thank you, Jane. As best as I understand it, I think that Bruce Lee quote captures it. You know, be like water, my friend. Water is moving all the time. It is flowing all the time. It becomes a deluge. It rains. It is it stays in place at various times depending on the context. So it is all about saying, don't through just your head come up with something and do that. Listen to what nature is telling you, what your surrounding is telling you, what are the natural flows around you, and act in accordance with that, because then that action is not forced action, but it uses the way in which the nature is flowing. And it seems like it is less action, but because it is following the natural curve of nature itself, it is tremendously powerful. It's a very effective way of acting. Next up is Maritza.
So I'm going to pick up there, Shrikant, because what Shrikant is actually doing is providing you with, he's defining Wu Wei. And I'd like to remind folks that another translation for Wu Wei is effortless action, not non-action, effortless. And that's what Shrikant just described. The water is flowing. It's not making effort, but it's moving. There's action there. It's moving. So because we're looking at decision making here, I invite you to focus more on that translation, effortless action. Also, there's a couple words I want to introduce here for Taoism when we're looking at decision making. So, I called this the naturalistic lens, and the key word here would be balance or even maybe harmony. But if we're looking at decision making, Taoism would also be, flexibility, simplicity, and it's a beautiful way to avoid analysis paralysis. Because if you're focusing on effortless action, you're not sitting there and heavily weighing all the variety of options. You're just moving. You're kind of not overthinking. Spontaneity would also be a verb that we would include for decision making with Taoism here. It's the idea because you are connecting with nature and the natural way. So effortless action means you're not belaboring, overthinking the decision.
Thank you, Maritza. Next up, let's go to transcendentalism. How does transcendentalism approach decision making? If you have comments, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. First is going to be DLJ. DLJ, go ahead.
I'm getting the impression I'm the quickest to the keyboard each time. Not because I have the best opinion. So one of these things is not like the others. This one stands out to me as an odd one out. Although there are, okay, we'll do compare and contrast later, right? So just on this one. Yeah, I think to answer the previous question, I think, wasn't it, Brian? I think this is falling out of favor as the divine, or the idea of the divine falls out of favor. I think there's probably a parallel there, because you've got in your comments direct experience of the divine, often found in nature, and I think a lot of people are sort of divorcing those two, seeing divine as a kind of invention compared to nature, or our perception of nature as being more of the reality, I suppose, on this one. I've got a question for you though. So when it's your turn, Marita, if you could answer this one. What's the difference between intuition versus instinct? If we're going on instinct and well, fair enough, we should all have a conscience, and when our conscience is pricked, then obviously that's our alert moment for making a decision. But going with our instinct, it sounds like that Humean thing of that what is it when he says that the reason is the slave of the passions, wasn't that David Hume? So shouldn't we have a reason override? So maybe the Stoics had a point there, right? So if we're only going with our intuition, well, you know, some of our intuitions are not always, and also the whole point of individuality. Sorry, you got me started there. So the whole point of individuality, should we not be using other people as a part of our control mechanism? It's, I mean, look at parts of the world where individualism is taking control. Look what a mess you're in the United States. Sorry about that. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Katie. Katie, go ahead.
I think transcendentalism focuses on the positive. If you're using nature to help you experience the divine, or I agree with DLJ that people are divided, that some people would be seeing nature just as nature, and some people would be seeing it like a sunset would be an expression of divine.
Thank you, Katie. Next up is Srijan.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with what DLJ said. I think transcendentalism maybe bases a whole lot on, you know, innate characteristics, which may or may not be true. Like maybe it's a bit idealistic about, you know, some insight or intuition that we innately have, and we're able to sort of use that to make the best decisions. Yeah, I mean, I can see this working if you are like, you know, let's say a really good person who has lots of morals and highly ethical or something like that. I can kind of see how this might work. You get these like automatic insights into making the best decisions, best course of action. But maybe it's a bit idealistic.
Thank you, Srijan. Maritza, do you want to comment on transcendentalism?
Yes. First, I would like to say that you know, instinct is an automatic response to a situation. Intuition is a feeling or thought that comes from within. That's how I view it. So if you're seeing instinct or intuition here, that's the distinction I'm making. Also, in the manner in which I understand spirituality to be referenced in transcendentalism, we're talking inner. We're not talking like a deity or something. This is your inner growth, inner personal strengths and being. And so for transcendentalism, it is a focus on individuality, and it's the idea of you're going with your intuition, because what it is you're flexing your individual self. And so the idea is personal growth comes by trusting in your own self over trusting in others. And for decision making, the idea here would be don't rely solely on other people for your decisions. So this one is the introspective lens, is what I called it. And I did have intuition as the choice word here to remember. And the reason for that is where this one is advocating for non-conformity in decision making, because the belief is if you're just following the crowd, are you making the best decision? Now, it could be stated, and there is room here for saying that following your own intuition might be steering you wrong as well. I mean, we're humans, we're fallible creatures, but the idea here is that you're not just like you're not floating. If you are just following what everyone else is doing, it comes off more as an evasion of decision making as opposed to an actual decision. And that's the concept. If you're looking at transcendentalism for decision making, here the emphasis is on making the decision, ensuring that it is yours. Now, if we're looking at this from a everything is not in one box, you're not using it without using everything else. But for this, you're looking at it from a perspective of, if you are tapping into your intuition and ensuring that you've taken a note of what your individual thinking is, then you already have that firmly in front of you before considering anyone else's opinions, and you can be certain that you're not just floating along with what someone else wants.
Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Mona. Mona, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to comment a little bit on the idea of intuition and why it might possibly be fallen out of favor. Because as I'm thinking from a rational perspective, it's very hard to assess to what degree intuition is effective. Like, to what degree, if I use intuition, am I going to achieve the result that I want? And I think that's where the problem is, because we're thinking in terms of perhaps immediate result. Like I have an action, does that immediately have the consequence that I wanted it to have? But on a larger, grander scheme of things, I'm thinking that intuition might quite possibly work in a different way, where a failure, so to speak, in a immediate sense, might lead to a chain reaction that leads to other beneficial results later on. So it's very hard to assess, really, if it is a failure indeed or not. So that was my my thinking, and how perhaps intuition may play a role in a way that we don't quite understand.
Thank you, Mona. Next up is going to be Laurie. Laurie, go ahead.
Hey, hi everyone, and thank you so much for the great presentation. So when I first read the title of this meeting, decision making, I felt it was a little bit kind of loaded emotionally, or maybe it led to a specific goal. And I think all of these three approaches, they don't actually lead, or they don't have as a focus a goal. They put more emphasis in letting the things flow rather than having a specific goal in mind. So that's what I was thinking. Hope it makes sense. So thank you.
Wonderful. Great observation, Laurie. All right. So what I was thinking of doing, Maritza, and tell me what you think. What I want to do is I want to take first all these three things together and ask the question. One part of it is inspired by Laurie, is saying, what we're talking about decision making. What is it that these three are completely missing on decision? All three together are missing something. Are they missing anything? That's first question. The second question would be, what is it that is common to all these three? Because you will notice that these are all three from very different times. These are not really modern philosophies or modern approaches to things. So in 20th century America, these are anachronistic. So they're different. So what is it that is common to all of them? And what is it that I'm missing? I want to start off there and then take maybe two at a time. So does that make sense to you? Okay. So let's first start with, what is it that is common to all these three? So just think of all of them together. Stoicism, Taoism, and Transcendentalism. What is it that they would all three agree on? What is it that is common to all these three? If you would like to answer that, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Yasif, I did not know whether you were trying to answer, you typed the exclamation mark before that. But if you want to comment on this particular thing, go ahead and type exclamation mark again. But let's get Maritza, if you could get us started on that, what do you think is common to all these three?
Well, for all three of them, I think that it's a matter of, it is the idea of you're not technically, so right, transcendentalism does have intuition, but it's actually not referring to intuition from a strong emotional state. So all three of them do tend to they're all kind of looking at it from a more calm, centering approach. And Laurie's comment is quite introspective. I do agree that you can see on all three of these, none of them is making a passionate argument for a fierce need for decision making. Like it's very, all three of them talk about finding like kind of a centering thing. And I will stop there. You have a few folks.
Wonderful, wonderful. I like the concept. They're all kind of calm, centering kind of approaches. Very good. So folks, we are asking the question, what is it that is common to all these three? It's going to be Yasef, followed by Bill and Srijan. Yasef, go ahead.
I was thinking that every three ideologies that they have in common, the three, is they're not more calm. Maritza was saying I would use the word pragmatic and theoretical, where to Laurie's question about problem-solving decision-making, this focuses more on unemotional decision-making, where perhaps you have certain fears or anxieties about doing something, but you know pragmatically on paper you should be doing this. So this is going to help you focus in on what you want to do and strive for your goals while being unfettered by your human emotions. So all three of them talk about being pragmatic, and they're all tools to help you succeed in what you want to do in life, right? Because some of the most stoic people in our centuries happen to be some of the most fierce and brutal warriors of their time. So it goes to show that, right, warriors, emperors, they have to make hard decisions, and most of their life is decision making. So you can see how all three of them play into decision making and achieving your goals.
Thank you. Thank you, Yasef. Next up is going to be Bill, Srijan, and DLJ. Bill.
Thanks. I think one of the most basic things in common between the three philosophies is the assumption that human decision-making left to its own devices without any philosophical lane markers or rules of thumb will not be optimal. It will be suboptimal. And therefore, philosophical rules of thumb and lane markers are needed to correct those distortions and suboptimalities. And I'll circle back later when we talk about the differences in terms of when each philosophy diagnoses what the distortions are in human decision-making left to its own devices. Do they come up with the same diagnosis or a different diagnosis? And therefore the same lane markers and rules of thumb or different lane markers and rules of thumb? So I'll stop there and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Next up is Srijan. Srijan, go ahead.
So yeah, I think I see them as like sort of, ways of life, a process, rather than, something like, for example, religion might suggest, you live in such ways, so you get a certain outcome, salvation, nirvana. So whereas like, Stoicism, Taoism, Transcendentalism, I think they're much more maybe connected to the human experience, and they're sort of going, maybe there's a few people or groups of people that sort of lived in such ways, and they found this to be a kind of like a very enjoyable, good way to sort of live your life in a way that's, in accordance with nature and world and yourself. And so like I kind of see them as sort of like, more like, even like humanist philosophies. I'm not sure if that's the right way to describe them, but yeah, sort of like ways of life more so than like, something to achieve a certain outcome or some end goal.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Srijan. Next up is going to be DLJ. DLJ, what is common to all three?
Well, as you said, they are of their time. So what's common is something that's missing. Where are the flow diagrams and the risk analysis? Where's the structure, the operating manual? We have all those nowadays. And obviously that's because we live in a different time and we've had centuries of developing decision trees and the like. Yeah, so obviously it's not their fault. It's the time that they grew up in, right?
Okay, thank you, DLJ. If I had to summarize it, there are some really good points made here. Firstly, there are all three philosophies. Oh, wait a minute. Before that, let's go with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Hi, I'd like to thank you for this discussion, and I just want to piggyback on, I think it was more what Bill said. What do they have in common? What struck me is what these three philosophies have in common is they allow us to use or to look in different places for information. So with Stoicism, the place that you're looking for information is rationality and specific virtues. In Taoism, the place you're looking for information is nature. And I think in Transcendentalism, with intuition, from what I've learned, is that when you know, but you don't know why you know. You can't point to the book or the virtue or the specific outside item that gives you that knowledge. It's putting aside your limited rational mind to open up to a much bigger source of information. So I think the fact that each one takes you out of your own little self and connects you to something to help you look at things a little more, or maybe a lot more, holistically, the way I might describe it.
Wonderful. Great comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is going to be, let's see, Jane, followed by Jyoti. Jane, what is common to all three?
Well, I was going to do the sort of take that DLJ came up with, which was to talk about what they don't have. They all don't have. Sure. And I think, well, I don't know anything about transcendentalism, so I may be wrong. But they don't call upon saying a prayer to a higher being, a god, or however you want to put it, to come up with the answer for you. It's much more of a that the person finds a solution to it, making a decision through really their own means, but using the philosophy to guide them.
Okay. Thank you. Next up is going to be Jyoti. Jyoti, what is common to these three?
What is common is that they all these three lead to a positive outcome. It may be from a different perspective from each other, but it's not harmful. It will not be harmful, and it will be good for the for the interest of the individuals, not just one individual, but collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Maritza, go ahead.
I want to add one more word to this mix that all three of them have in common. They all invite you to move forward with intent.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to try to summarize. So, so the question is, what is common to all these three? So firstly, all three of them are deep philosophies. They are not like when people think about decision making in modern times, they always say, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to do now? Don't tell me anything else. What do I need to do? Give me some ideas about what I can do. I'll say, okay, well, or what comes before what? Let me just, so it just takes all of your desires or whatever it is that you have as given, and it tries to do something with it. These are far deeper ways of approaching life. They are a much wider perspective. They're holistic. They are philosophies. They are ways of life. They rely on principles. They have like this centering where all of your being kind of comes together in various ways, and there is a feeling of calm to all these three. If I had to summarize, the best capturing of the difference between the modern times and these times, because transcendentalism is really based on the Indian philosophy. They're very deeply influenced by the Indian philosophy. So in that sense, all these are really old philosophies. And what is difference between them, that and modern times? And the best capturing of that I've seen is by C.S. Lewis in his book, Abolition of Man. He says that we have forgotten the thou. He uses the word thou as being the universal principle that is behind everything. And all these three have the thou. Like transcendentalism is trying to get at the thou through through introspective experience. Taoism is trying to get at the thou in nature, and Stoicism is all about the universal principles that you're trying to get at through reason. So the Tao, and Tao is not really a part of the modern parlance of this kind of universal principle. So that's the thing that is common to them, and that's, I think, the biggest thing that is different. So their approach is far more kind of principle-based, long-term, good things for your life as such, as opposed to making a decision in a particular case. It will help you make a decision in a particular case, but they approach it in this broad, holistic way. So that's what I would say. Now, I think we have discussed a little bit about these three as compared to modern times. Maritza, what I'm thinking of doing next is to take two of them at a time and try to place it. I think, so firstly, I want to give a plug. We have really focused on Taoism in a big way. We've also focused on Stoicism in the past. We have, I think, done about 30 meetups on Stoicism with some of the top Stoic authors coming and presenting here and answering questions. So if you go to 52 Living Ideas channel in YouTube, you'll find all those. But on Taoism, we've just went to town. We've done more than like about 100 meetups, 200 hours of program on Tao. We've gone through each of the 81 verses with about like 15 to 20 people reading the favorite translations of theirs, and then Jason and Amon translating each verse for our group and explaining it character by character. So we have really dived deeply into the Tao. And I have very good news. It has been extremely popular. It's one of the most popular series. Jason was visiting New York, and he said, I missed the Tao. I wanted to go back, and I want to do a second version of my translation. So starting January, we are going to do a full, dive into the Tao, verse by verse. Jason and Amon doing a second take of their translation, based on everything that they have learned about translate. Meanwhile, they have translated Art of War. They have Art of War. Yes, no, Art of War was not translated, but they've translated Confucius. So they've done a lot of work on that. So they're going to use that in order to produce a new translation for for the meetup. So don't miss that. That's going to be on Tuesdays starting January. Okay, so now in terms of taking two of them, so one idea I had, Maritza, is to first take care of transcendentalism, because Stoicism and Taoism, most people seem to have quite a bit of base, but they don't seem to have that much base in transcendentalism. So one option is to start comparing Stoicism and Taoism, just do that, and then bring in transcendentalism. Alternatively, we can go with transcendentalism first. But I think starting with comparing Stoicism and Taoism would be a good place to start. What do you think?
Sure, let's start there.
Okay, so the question now is, now we are looking at only Stoicism and Taoism. We're keeping transcendentalism aside. What is the difference between them? Let me just give you the general observations people have made so far, okay? I'm not going to name names, but so firstly, we talked about not just using one of these perspectives, but multiple of these perspectives and coming up with a combination of these perspectives themselves. Not just these three, but a whole bunch of others. The second point is internal versus external, the focus on the external, your interaction in a social context versus your internal psychology itself or your own life. Second is to kind of flip the question of saying, how do you avoid bad decisions? So instead of saying, how do you make good decisions? Just how do you avoid bad decisions as a way of approaching this problem. Dependence on context. So do certain context lend themselves to certain philosophies, certain ways, one of these as opposed to the other. Next is, let's see, what is this? Virtues, taking it from the angle of virtues, what are the virtues that, what would Stoicism, what they would say is virtues. What are the virtues of Taoism? What are the virtues of Transcendentalism? Next is to pick the philosophy that suits you. Picking and choosing, doing a combination. What is the role of feeling in all of this? Then there is, whether this is for the moment, the time frame. Is it for a lifetime that you're talking about, or moment to moment, or something in the middle? The role of other people in all of this. Reason versus intuition. These are some of the points that were brought up as people were discussing various things. So, okay, so now the question is, how do you compare the decision-making of Stoicism and Taoism? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to make any comments. Or you can raise your hand in Zoom, whatever you prefer. Ebony, go ahead.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, now we are comparing, we have looked at all three together. Now we are taking two at a time, and we are trying to compare decision-making, and we are now doing that. How is decision-making under Stoicism different from decision-making under Taoism? You can also talk about the differences between Stoicism and Taoism as lead in to that. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think if you're comparing Taoism and Stoicism, I always think of Stoicism as the dichotomy of the control. So it's kind of like the decision is like, what can you control, or what can you do about it? I think Stoicism in the basic form asks that question. What can you do about it, right? And then Taoism is kind of like, you do make a decision, but then you let it go, and then you just let whatever happens happen. So I think if you're comparing the two, you could kind of see them being combined in, you could see Taoism being, well, you can see Stoicism being make the best decision you can, based off of what you can control. And then Taoism is like, let the rest go. And, you know, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and then you deal with it. And it's kind of cyclical. You know, you deal with what you can deal with, you let what happens, and then you deal with what happens. Those are my thoughts.
Excellent, excellent point. I'll just say, I'll make a very quick comment here. You know, Taoism has the acceptance of reality that Stoicism has. It starts by saying, you know, nature is what it is. Tao is what it is. Respect that, accept that, you know, live with that. So there's like the dichotomy of what you can't control. Taoism has that in full form. What Stoicism has on the top of it is saying, okay, so then now that we have said you can't control all of this, what is it that you can control? So I think that's how I think about it. Next up is going to be DLJ, followed by Bill. DLJ.
Yeah, this is actually quite a tricky one. I think I had to think about this. So I'm thinking about this in systems terms because I can't think any other way. My own failing. Stoicism, I'm seeing as a top down. So we start with virtues, and then from that we can derive policies, then we can derive procedures, and then we have a kind of mechanism for moving forward. Almost business-like, right? Then how would you describe Taoism? I think it's more of an in-out rather than a top-down. It's the balance between the external part of the system, in other words, your environment, nature, versus your internal, also your internal nature, it could be, and trying to get the balance right between the two. So it's kind of the conflict between the in and the out, as opposed to the top-down. I don't see any sort of part of Taoism where it says define your policies first and then go from there. It's kind of it's not that, is it? It's go from that. It's trying to get it's more like entropy, actually. It's the balance between the inner and the outer and finding that equilibrium, right? So there you go. I'm visualizing it's top down versus in out.
Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. So in Taoism, the word day, which I'm not sure I'm pronouncing correctly, but in English it's transliterated as de. It means ethics, but there's two Taoist approaches to it. One is a Confucian rule-based, logic-based, rationality-based approach. The other approach to Taoist ethics within Taoism is that the ethical thing to do emerges not from rational analysis, but from getting in tune with the way through inner stillness, inner wholeness, inner non-forcing. And that once one is in that place of being on the path of the way through inner wholeness, stillness, and non-forcing, spontaneously from within will emerge the decision about what the right thing is to do and what is the other wrong thing to not do, which is kind of a very different model of how ethical decisions emerge compared to the rational, logical, rule-bound, analytical approach to how ethical decisions emerge. And so Taoism has both, whereas Stoicism seems, and I'm not an expert on Stoicism, but it seems like it's more about like a lot of Stoic texts are about logic and logical analysis and categorical analysis to come up with like cognitive rule systems for avoiding unethical behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'll stop there, and I stand ready to be corrected by people who are more expert on Stoicism or Taoism or both.
No, thank you. You know, Dao De Jing, that the is the way. It's you know, Dao and Jing is the book. So the way of the Dao, the book of that is Dao De Jing, and the over there, the Confucian philosophy is a completely different philosophy. So a Taoist would not, the of the Tao is very different than Confucius. And it Absolutely. I mean, what your characterization of it in terms of being kind of more intuitive is exactly right. It doesn't have that rational element that Stoicism has. There is no kind of systematic presentation of it, in reasoned presentation of it. It is all kind of you being open to nature and going by the rhythms of nature. Thank you. Next up is Jane, followed by Marco. Jane, go ahead.
So I've been aware of Stoicism for a number of years now, whereas I'm quite new to Taoist ideas. One of the ways that I'm learning about it is there is a man who's from China, and he is currently translating the Tao Te Ching, and he's going through this in a meetup group with some Westerners, and we're helping him with grammar and so on. But it's a great way to learn about the text, this very ancient text. But the thing that, if there's one thing that has often stood out to me as being different from practices in Stoicism, is what's just been said, actually, is about how you're often advised in the text not to use intellect, and but instead, I suppose, go with nature. And yet in Stoicism, rational thought is a prominent idea. So I have a clash there between the two. And well, I just had to pick the one that I think works best for me, like everybody does. My vote is with Stoicism, but I think Taoist ideas have a lot to offer as well.
No, absolutely. I think you put your finger on exactly the difference between the two. For example, Tao Te Ching starts, again, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this correctly, but it goes, Dao ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao, Ming ke Ming, Fei Chang Ming. It means that Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. And name that can be named is not the eternal name. So it's saying that words can't capture reality. Okay. The radical opposite of that is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So the Western mind, word is crucial to word, to understanding things. So it holds that there is a Tao, but it thinks that we can grasp it with the word. And that's exactly what Stoicism does. It's saying that there is the Tao, there is reality. It is what it is. And you have to have that humility in face of it, just like the Taoist does, except that you can use your reason to understand it. Jane, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, just follow up from that, because what comes into my head anyway is that on a sort of big level, I like the Taoist idea of going with nature. But when it comes to everyday small decisions that I might have to make, like maybe somebody upsets me, what do I do about it? Then Stoicism is this practical guide that I find really useful. So to me, it's what sort of level you're talking about when it comes to how to live your life, how to make decisions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Next up is going to be Marco, followed by Bill. Marco, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess Stoicism is more rational. The Taoism is more like going with the flow, and as far as like transcendentalism, you're sort of, if you're basing your decisions on like, like self-improvement, or then you sort of have to I guess you have a choice between, you don't have to go the way of like going with the flow. You can also choose, like, if you can also go the rational way, you can also go the, going with the flow way. So I guess it's not like a combination of, it's not really a combination of the two, but it's sort of like maybe there's a little bit more like leeway, since you're sort of basing on decisions on self-improvement. Like,
Thank you. Thank you, Marco. I appreciate that. Next up is Bill.
Thanks. That was a illuminating exchange between Jane and Shrikant a minute ago. I want to build off that. So let's suppose there's two different sources of a good decision. One is an intuitive, wordless source that the Tao focuses on, that's beyond words. The other is a more analytical, wordy, word-intensive source. And so the question is, what's the relation between them? Is it either or? You use one or the other. If you're using one, you can't use the other. I would like to propose a different model of the relation between them, which is more of a nested model, like, those Russian Petrushka dolls where there's a doll inside a doll, inside a doll, inside a doll. So on the inner level is that intuitive source, and then a more outer level is the more analytical source. And the most visceral way to capture this relationship is a question for all of you. Have you ever had a flash of intuition that hit your mind, the whole insight hit your mind in 2 seconds, but it took you 2 minutes of words to explain the entire thing to somebody? Most people have experienced that. So that flash of insight that hits your mind in its full, complete form in 2 seconds, that's that intuitive, wordless form of cognition that comes from a part of the mind that's doing problem solving all the time. Like the scientist who, in the shower in the morning, just an idea pops into his head from somewhere in his unconscious that solves a problem he was facing in the lab, So that's one form in which those solutions that are arrived at by the problem-solving sources in the mind, it comes up with it in that one form, which is wordless, beyond words, very compact, but complete. And then the other form is this kind of very wordy form that's more analytical that you need to couch it in. And the two are kind of like nested within each other in the sense that they can be cooperative and complementary to each other. And like I'll close with this. The balance is to avoid all of one or all the other, and to have a more balanced relationship between the two, so that one's analytical mind is able to capture these flashes of insight and turn them into words without getting overly absorbed in the analysis, but retaining the crucial essence of that wordless insight. So I'll stop there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Great point. And Maritza, what I want to do is I want to build on Bill's point a little bit and then hand it over to you, because this is a great way to actually contrast all these three, and not just contrast, but see the relationships between all these three. And this is just my take. So Maritza, I would also love to hear what you think. See, I think it's not two, it's three things. One is nature itself, which is like being in touch with nature, which is the absolute external, which is what Tao is drawing everything from. Then there is reason in the middle, and then there is intuition of the transcendentalists, which is all about using your intuitive faculty of saying, what is the most important thing? What is the most valuable thing? What really counts? What is meaningful? Just focused on that internally. So you have the kind of the intuition on one end, and you've got the nature on the other end. And in the middle, you have got the reasoning. And you really need all these three things to be functioning to do great things, because you want to make sure that you are in consonance with nature. It's very easy for reason to kind of run away by itself and get alienated from nature. Similarly, you need to know, to have this kind of deep intuition, to come up with new things, to see if there is something wrong with the intuition. So the reasoning does require that corrective mechanism from the intuitive side as well. And reasoning is kind of in the middle, which is actually mediating between these two things. There is internal stuff that, we are doing, and there is absolute external stuff that is doing, and you're kind of negotiating and mediating and resolving things between those things, kind of going back and forth. So Marissa, what do you think?
I think that's fantastic, and that's kind of the way I have been looking at it as well. I look at the I don't believe any of these can actually exist in a vacuum. I would, in fact, caution anyone: no, don't say I'm only doing Stoicism and blah 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 to everything else. I don't think that works. I would almost say that a decision might benefit from considering all three approaches before actually taking the decision. The idea here is where, with Stoicism, you're looking at it from Stoicism it would be like writing a pros and cons list, and then, but Taoism, you are observing the workings of the system. You're just kind of watching it. You're not writing anything. You're watching how it's working now before choosing what to do. And then for transcendentalism, you're doing more of a internal, okay, this would best be corrected by this action. So it's more of an internal kind of mind mapping is the way I would look at it. Those three approaches, and I think that it's an idea of so all three of them are inviting you to do some type of reflection. That is something similar that we've discussed, but they all invite you to do it in a different way. And I think that the case can be made that almost it's a ladder, it's very similar to where you just said it. Actually, I like that you put Stoicism in the middle. I think that actually is a really good idea, because you would probably start first with observing what's there. You would the concept of Taoism, this harmony, this balance, you would probably look at that first, and then you would maybe do more of your pros and cons, as it were, before actually taking any action.
All right, let me make it a little bit broader. This is really India, China, and West at its best. Okay, we are looking at the Indian corpus. India is focused on consciousness. It is focused on what is going on in here. How do you concentrate? How do you manage emotions? And transcendentalism comes directly from that. So let's go back to the root. So you have India. The Taoism is really heart of what China is offering the world, because Confucianism is, I don't think that, I think West has better structures than Confucian structures, because Confucian structures tend to be separate. They tend to be kind of completely top-down structures. So just keeping that aside for a moment, Taoism is what China has to offer. It is the concept of health, concept of balance, concept of being close to nature, keeping your eyes open and all your senses open, and taking in what the nature is telling you, what reality is telling you, and not ignoring it. So Taoism is that. And then the internal kind of intuitive, kind of concentration-based approach to your consciousness, the entire kind of meditation, all of that area is on this side with the India. And what the West has is in the middle, that talks to both of these people, actually. And Stoicism is a classic example. It has very deep acceptance of reality, just like Taoism, not just of nature, but also of people. So it is one step higher in that way. It's not as good at nature as Taoism is, Taoism is much better at nature. But then it also, the dichotomy of control separates out what you can control. And that's actually your will. And saying that this is what you can actually control. This is how you use your mind. So it is actually moving then completely into the Indian corpus here in trying to show, okay, how do you use your consciousness? So how do you use your consciousness? So it is going from here to there, and it has words to explicate all of this, which is a giant, giant step. So that's the three-part division. So any comments, Maritza, and then we will go to Andrea.
It's brilliant. I love the idea of considering transcendentalism as, what is consciousness. That's brilliant. It's a fantastic way of bringing it directly into the fold with the other three and showing how it could interweave with them. I like that. I may say more of that in a minute. I'm gonna chew on that for.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Andrea. Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had kind of a quick question, and I apologize because I got in a little bit late, but there's a little bit, I mean, this is, we all are who we are, so like it's an intellectual discussion, but is two things, I guess. One is it possible that any of these sort of over intellectualize ways of dealing with life? Like, I was talking with a friend over the weekend, and we were talking about some of the stuff, and her statement was, well, sometimes you just need a good cry, which I thought was really kind of fascinating. And another thing that I had heard, I mean, this is not a path that we need to go down at all, but it's kind of fascinating to me. Another thing that I several years ago, and it's not any one of these three philosophies necessarily, but I had read a book by this journalist about meditation, and it's called like 30% Happier or something like that. And one of the things that he mentions is with any kind of meditation, that there are people for whom meditation is actually a path to depersonalization. And so it's very dangerous for people with certain kinds of mental disorders. So I just wanted to kind of get people's insight on both of those things. I mean, are there times where really you just need a good cry, or you need a good run? And are there reasons to avoid some of these philosophies because they actually take you down a dangerous path that doesn't help you deal with your life?
Thank you, Andrea. Andrea, what we have done is that we've systematically tried to build the nature of each of these philosophies, and then we are comparing all three together. So we're going in a very systematic way. So I'm going to continue along that line, because this would take the discussion off whatever we have built up so far. So let me go ahead on that. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to address the topic you just reframed and Shrikant and framed earlier. So I want to give an extremely simplified model of the relation between the Stoicism, the Taoism, and the Transcendentalism, which will be an oversimplification, but it might be helpful. So the Stoic rational analytical approach to decisions can be great, but if it goes overboard, it can produce too many boundaries. The Taoist approach to arriving at decisions through wholeness and stillness and non-forcing, etc., can be great, but if it goes overboard, it produces too few boundaries. Okay, so on one hand, there's the risk of too many boundaries. On the other hand, there's a risk of too few boundaries. So transcendentalism is the antidote, because it's basically saying, well, let me back up and pin down the tension between the too many and the too few boundaries a little more precisely. Every time there's too many boundaries, no, let's do it this way. Anytime there's too few boundaries, the antidote is to add back a boundary, which serves the beneficial function of giving you the boundary you need, but that boundary might simultaneously have a negative side effect that's a little too constrictive, okay? And it's the same in reverse. Anytime there's too many boundaries, you want to let go of a boundary, which has a good effect of getting rid of a boundary you didn't need, but it might also go a little too far and create too much boundarylessness. So Transcendentalism comes in and it says there's two ultimate sources of how to navigate that process of re-engineering your boundaries and your boundarylessness over time to get the right mix of boundaries and boundarylessness. Transcendentalism says the individual and nature. As an antidote, okay, the individual is the antidote to relying on to a person relying too much on others for like cookie cutter solutions to this tension. And nature is the antidote to relying too much on kind of artificially man-made things, you know, in industrial whatever, you know, as a potential solution to this tension. It's like, wait, nature, we're ultimately humans evolved from nature, and our own minds and bodies have an ability to get from nature the reason we need and the wholeness without overthinking things that we need. If you just go into nature like the Transcendentalists did, you'll get what you need in both the reason area and the kind of getting beyond your thinking mind area. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. What I would say is this, that of these three philosophies, I mean, I'll put it very extremely. Stoicism is capable of building civilization. By these other two by themselves can't build civilization. Taoism has always required Confucianism. Transcendentalists can do something by just going in the wilderness and communing with themselves. And it's valuable. I'm not saying it's not. But what I'm saying is that what Stoicism does is that it allows you to be a sage in Taoist terms, or, you know, a transcendentalist in the middle of a city, because they have figured out, and that requires reason, that requires words, that requires cosmopolitanism, which is a crucial idea of Stoicism, because you need to understand what is common to all human beings. And you need to explicate that, live that, communicate that in order to build a civilization in which you keep communing with nature and you keep communing with the deepest of your soul. So Stoicism can bring nature, civilization, and individual will together. Neither of the other two can. Go ahead, Maritza.
Oh, that's a fantastic way of saying that, Shrikant. You know, I did want to mention that, you know, as Jane had pointed out, neither of these start from a basis of an emotional approach. So remember, we're talking about decision making. So all of these are advocating for a more pragmatic approach, but that does not mean that they preclude any emotionality. Again, we are emotional creatures at our very core, right? So I mean, to ignore that would be to the detriment of any way of life that one is attempting to adopt, because emotions, regardless of how much you want to throw them to the side, they're going to rear their ugly head. But I think the beauty of these three, and specifically Stoicism, what is so enticing to me about Stoicism is the idea of moderation. I see that in all three of them and what they're doing. And so Stoicism to me gives you the tools that you need to get through an emotionally lading time. So if you have a decision that is emotionally very charged, having the tool of Stoicism will allow you to find pragmatic moments within an emotional time frame. And if you don't have Stoicism, you're just kind of all over the place and you're emotional. But if you have this tool to reach and grab, it helps you through it. And that's the way I view Stoicism. Now, I'm not an expert, but I view it as, you practice Stoicism every day. You practice it on the days when you are calm. You practice it making decisions. And if you use it all the time, when you find yourself in a spot where you are super emotionally laden, you can use this tool to help you through it without burning the bridge, as it were. And I think to some degree, you have this similarity with Taoism and Transcendentalism, where somebody, I forget who now, at the very beginning said they viewed these all as being ways of life. And I would agree. They all provide us with tools for capitalizing on the reasoning aspects. So what sets humans apart is our ability to be rational creatures, despite the fact that we are emotional creatures, right? So, and these three tools, practicing them regularly, give us a way to have more balance and be less driven by one's emotions. So, with all three, one can, the emotion's going to happen. It is a natural thing of life, but your decision doesn't have to be an emotionally laden and charged decision if you've picked up any of these tools as you're moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that was a great point. I want to broaden the discussion of Stoicism, because I'm saying that this is Western thought. Aristotle has it too. In fact, I was stunned. We looked at Seneca after going through a lot of Gospel of John, and I saw a lot of similarities between them. So this issue of saying that, look, I'm going to face up everything that is negative. I'm going to keep my eye on what I think is the greatest thing, and I will make the hard decisions now in order to restructure things if needed. That is there across the board here. Because the other ones are like one-sided of saying, okay, let me just focus on my own intuition. That can very easily go awry. There is no feedback mechanism with other people, with nature. It has with nature, but with other people, it has a negative view. Like transcendentalists are actually afraid of nature, not in the Indian context, by the way. Indian context is very much kind of, that consciousness is integrated in a way with nature in a very odd way, but very different way than compared to the West, but it is also integrated. Transcendental is like a reaction of people to the excessiveness of modernism going away from the roots of consciousness. And they're bringing in Indian thought in order to fix that. And it does fix that internally for people, but it kind of alienates them from the society. But if you go back to Stoicism, the Stoics are very much people of the society. These are emperors, these are slaves, these are traders. Seneca was a trader, Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, Epictetus was a slave, and they functioned in society, doing all kinds of things while maintaining their spirituality, their consciousness. All right, let's see. Does anybody else have anything else? So I'm saying that it's the West. So there is stuff in the West. Again, old West, not the modern West. Modern things, I think, are different than all these three put together. Let's see. All right. Anybody else has any comments on this? So we've done, I think, a decent job, Maritza. What do you think? Well, is there any place that we should go next?
Oh man, I'm not sure. We've gone in a different direction. I really am fascinated by the idea. You know what, Srikant, maybe we can focus a little bit more on you brought it up once, and I think Jane, Kay had his hand up or
Yeah,
their hand up.
let's go with Kay. Kay, go ahead.
Hi there, thank you. I just wanted to mention on the tail end of a couple speakers here. One person mentioned, I think Peter mentioned, that we need to consider people's health, and definitely, especially nervous systems disorder. It's like childhood complex post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Their nervous system dysregulation, that they're disorders, and the dysregulation from abuse or some sort of traumatic experience, if the person's nervous system is already damaged, Stoicism can't account for all of that. Sometimes, and I'm just using the example of Peter's, just that one, that category of nervous systems disorders. It's just a good example in regard to Stoicism. It's just not effective for all people at all times. And then there was another practical thing I wanted to say. I've been holding on to it for a while. I should have made notes.
That's all right. Whenever you have, you can come back. So thank you. I mean, these are, absolutely, there are individual cases where, there are kind of special factors which are very different, and they require, sometimes just medical help, some medicines, and you need those. There is no questioning about that. Next up, so Maritza, what were you saying? Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just thinking that it might be interesting to go into the how is this applicable in our day-to-day aspect?
Okay.
We hadn't touched on that too much.
Wonderful. So let's do that. Okay, so the question is, how is this applicable to our day-to-day life? How does decision-making work? The decisions that you make, what do you use for that? Am I phrasing it correctly? Do you have any other way of phrasing it, Marisa, asking the question to people?
I guess maybe the thought experiment would be, we've put these different concepts, and we've got the three choice. You're looking at reasoning, balance, intuition. How do you draw on these for decision making? And maybe after that, effectively, maybe we need that word too.
Okay, very good. Excellent. DLJ, fast on the keyboard. Go ahead.
Okay, so the short answer is I don't draw on any of those. I was making decisions a long time before I'd heard of any of these, like when I was 3 or something. So obviously we have an innate decision-making process. And later on we can refine using whichever philosophy we find, or any combination of them. But I will say in favor of these, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? The modern ways of doing decision-making have definitely drawn from aspects of all of these. And in fact, well, I've mentioned you in the chat that I have a presentation on this stuff, which is a whole sort of governance as a social, or morality as a social governance system. And many of the elements in these you can actually pick out and say, oh yeah, that matches with Stoicism, that matches with et cetera, et cetera. So they're not abandoned, but we have grown from them, I think.
Thank you, DLJ. Anybody else? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to comment, or raise your hand in Zoom. All right, so then let me ask Maritza. Maritza, how do you use these 3 things in your decision making?
Be carefully. No, I would again, for me, it's idea of it's moderation. I think looking at these 3, what stands out most for me is the potential danger in adopting any one of them. I think it would be very dangerous in our modern times for anyone to say, I am only following the Taoist way and at the exclusion of all others. I think that we benefit And as DLJ just said, we stand on the backs of giants. I think the beauty of living in modern times is that we do have all three of these to draw upon. And I would look at it as these would be my collecting of my thoughts and information prior to making the decision.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Maritza, I really like this series. This is one of my favorite series because this process of taking, one idea and seeing, different people's or different philosophies approach to that is exactly what this, the forum is very good at, because we've studied some of these things in great amount of detail, and we are able to look at it by comparing them to another. We are able to see it better. And then you also throw in things like transcendentalism, which most people are not familiar with, which also adds, it kind of pulls in something that we have not looked at into the discussion. So thank you. Next up, go ahead.
Oops. No, I was just gonna say I love hearing the others' perspectives. And I cheat a little. So I always throw in something that's, it's kind of force everyone to learn a little bit more about, but also me. And oftentimes, it happens all the time, Shrikant. We'll throw something in there and there'll be somebody who's an expert who shows up. And it's like, yes.
Unfortunately, no transcendentalists showed up here. They are busy working on their stuff, their own mind. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, I think first of all, great presentation, Maritza, and great questions, and it's overall a great meetup. I think it's kind of what you said, Maritza, is you don't use one thing. I think two, you apply it to different philosophies work in different situations. I always think if you want to make a rational decision, based on your values and your morals and like where you're going in life, then you go to something like Stoicism. That'll help you, ration it out. I think when you're emotional and there's nothing you can do, you go to Taoism because, in a sense, it has this calming effort and it's kind of like, it flows like water. Like sometimes the water's going to go through rocks. That means that's going to be your tough time. Sometimes it's going to be smooth and calm, and that's the time where you can rest. It's always going to be like everybody's going to go through those rough patches in life, and I think Taoism helps you deal with that. I think for transcendentalism, I think you connect to nature and really realize, in a sense, how small you are in the world. But that's a good thing because you realize it doesn't revolve around you. And if things go wrong, it isn't the end of the world. It isn't going to come crashing down. And when there's nothing else to do, you could just kind of go into yourself and connect with nature and realize that there's nothing you can do, but you can just relax. You can just, in a sense, let it flow. And I think transcendentalism can help you do that. And I could be totally wrong about that.
I want to make one comment about transcendentalism, but let's Joe go first. Joe, go ahead.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So as the last several people spoke, I was thinking, and I'm like, full disclosure, I'm probably more transcendentalist than anything else, although there seems to be more of a balance. But when I hear transcendentalism, I think of Emerson, not so much the Indian religions, but I think of Emerson and that consciousness that is connected, however you want to describe it or call it. So I was thinking that we've got Stoicism for the mind, and I think generally humans are made up of mind, body, spirit. So we've got Stoicism for the mind. We've got Taoism for the body, and Transcendentalism for the spirit. And if you can, it is so interconnected. I'm a nurse and I see it all the time about, it's not just what's affecting the body. It got into the body from some other place. And if you don't address those other issues, you're not going to get anywhere. So to me, it's so interwoven. So that's why I think depending on what the issue is, you really do need to have a balance between these three areas, however you want to describe how they connect.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. I want to build on that. Actually, we have done many meetups, at least 150 meetups on ideas of transcendentalists. Okay. At least 150.
This is the first time I've been here.
Yes. So the two big transcendentalists we have focused on is Louis Sullivan and Buckminster Fuller. Okay, their core is transcendentalism, but they are not they are transcendentalists who actually integrate. I mean, the point that you made is that human beings have threefold nature. We have the spirit, we have the mind, and we have the body. It's like, and you have to use all of them have to be working for you to be working. Okay, so somebody like Louis Sullivan will explicitly say, look, these are the powers of a human being. And they have a certain nature to each of them. Each of them has a certain nature. And you need to use all of them consonant. You have to use your spirit in a way which is consonant with the mind consonant with the body. And there is these loops that are going on, between all these three. And nothing works without that. Okay, what happens is that there is a tendency all of us have of just focusing on things that we like or we get attached to, or which is common in society. We are trying to say, okay, let's get the body right. And in the process, you lose the focus on the mind and the spirit. Vice versa, there are things that, the great thing about all these three, actually, now I'm taking transcendentalist as Louis Sullivan is my most favorite thinker amongst the transcendentalists, because he's able to, he builds buildings using those principles. He's an architect. He builds building, and he's considered to be the father of modern architecture. So he was extremely influential in shaping how the architecture should be. And his whole principle is that architecture is for human beings. So you have to achieve the physical requirements, you have to achieve the mental requirements, and you have to achieve the spiritual requirements in the same building. If you can't do that, then it's not a good building. It has to have that kind of a awe or feeling of beauty that touches your spirit. And it has to be logically arranged so that it is effective. And it has to have, so all of this is and. And so in that sense, these transcendentalists, and these people are special, okay? Like Louis Sullivan or Buckminster Fuller. And that is true for people like Emerson too. But what happens is that it is highly individual. You have to put together your own integration of how you're going to use, how you're going to develop all the three of these faculties to the fullest. And you have to work with it. You have to make it work. You have to, so that, like Sullivan, and it actually shows in the signature. Like you look at a Sullivan building and you say, oh, that's Sullivan. You look at something that Buckminster Fuller does and you have the same. And Buckminster Fuller and Sullivan, though they are based on transcendentalism, the way their buildings are, way they talk, who they are is very, 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 very different, because the proportion of, for example, reason for Buckminster Fuller is much, 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 much higher. The amount of spirituality in Louis Sullivan is much, 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 much higher. Being architects, both of them are very good, at the body part. They're very good at kind of shaping the physical things, because that's really their core of their profession. But one of them is kind of more towards the mind, one of them is more towards the spirit. But one who is towards the spirit is superb on the mind, okay? And one who is, focused primarily on the mind is superb at spirit, compared to most people that you see. So they have all these three, but they work on it, So Jane, Joe, what do you think?
Oh, I agree. I'm going to have to investigate more about Louis Sullivan and Buckminster Fuller in terms of transcendentalism, but that's really helpful. But no, I agree with you, and I really think you're right that you do have to have a balance. So thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, Maritza, any comments?
Yes, I was going to say that is what was most fascinating to me about transcendentalism, is that it is an little known philosophy, but I found that it's actually it's so many of the philosophers we've been looking at and studying here, on Comprehensivist Wednesdays, they don't have the moniker or hold the moniker of transcendentalist, but they would fit the definition. And something else that it merits mentioning is that they are comprehensivists. And I think that a beautiful thing about all three of these ways of life, as it were, is the idea that if you don't look at only one of them, you look at all three, again, you're giving yourself more perspectives, more options. And it's what we do here at 52 Living Ideas with and the Thinking Society. So that's kind of the beauty to me. And I'm just I think transcendentalism gets a bad rep. I don't think it gets the love it deserves of attention. It's not as well known, but it definitely, there's merit. And I there is you said Walden is who you think of when you think of transcendentalism. I would say, oh no, you said Emerson. Walden spends a lot of time connecting the dots with the Indian concepts and views on transcendentalism. So if you ever wanted to, you could look into it there. Shrikant, maybe we can talk a little bit about how we're going to change in the new year, the way we're doing the series.
Yes. All right. So new year, what we are going to do is that we are launching a series on C.J. Fernley's book, which is on collaborating for comprehensivism. And it's going to be first and third Wednesdays of each month, starting, I think, January 3rd, which is, so that's what we're going to do. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this series that Maritza has of taking three things in common, and she's going to apply it to the work of C.J. Fernley. Now, the great thing about that is that C.J. actually, in his 27 chapters and 27 videos that he did, the range of topics that he has covered is amazing. So it's a very rich ground for that. So Maritza will do kind of pieces within these meetups. And Maritza, but the thing is that I do like this series a lot. So if you decide after doing this, within CJ meetups that, oh, no, I want to do this anytime, because I think I end up getting a lot from this, because it kind of asks the question. See, because each person will make a comment or ask a question that I have not thought of. And it just kind of triggers new connections, and which is extremely valuable. You see some similarities between things, which are kind of, it's like the material for it was there, but then you have like this searchlight of a question or a comment go through all of that material, and you suddenly see, oh, there is a pattern over there. So it's wonderful. to be doing that. So, but we're going to do that. You're going to at least start off by doing that within the context of CJ meetups. I strongly recommend the CJ meetups. CJ went through the entire book. It took him, I think, 2 years or so of the meetups, and he is such a systematic person. He has the essays for each of them, several video references, and then he did a meetup on this. So there is that meetup video as well. And we'll be taking them one by one, and we'll be building something on the top of that. And part of that is we'll also be publishing the book, CJ's book, which is simply going to be the collection of everything that he has written. Comprehensivism, for people who are not familiar with his book, the idea is that, okay, let me start with Maritza. Maritza, what is comprehensivism?
Comprehensivism is taking an intentional deep dive into a variety of topics and then internalizing them and using them all together to problem solve in the day-to-day.
Wonderful. Absolutely. I mean, what it is saying is that, look, it is in a sense, it's a solution to the problem of specialization. People think you learn by specializing. You say, okay, I'm just focused on this. I mean, this entire discussion of spirit, matter, and body, it's showing you, spirit, mind, and body is showing you, no, you can't just say, okay, I'm just working on the body. And Joe was rightly pointing out, like, if you are in the medical profession, you will see that. You will see, okay, there's something wrong with the mind of the person and the spirit of the person, and that's the what you're seeing in the body is the result of that. And no matter what you throw, because everybody, like, see, modern people, they think that you can just throw stuff at things and it'll work. All of these in the Stoicism, they regard human beings as a system of interacting parts, and you can't really fix one without looking at the whole. So comprehensivism is all about that, of kind of pulling back from just specialization. And the best formulation of this is by Buckminster Fuller. He's saying you have to be macro comprehensive and micro incisive. So not only you have to be able to go broad, but then you have to be able to bring everything. Like if you're treating a patient, you have to actually take your understanding of the body, spirit, and mind and actually help the patient. It has to be that. So it has to have that depth and breadth at the same time. And that's what CJ did a whole bunch of meetups on. How do you do that? So, all right. So thank you very much. Maritza, you want to close? Any closing thoughts?
No, I just want to thank everyone for walking through. I always learn a lot. I'm with you, Shrikant. For me, this was a fantastic learning experience. I do the research in the beginning, and I always invariably come out with new perspectives after the meetup. So I thank you to everyone for being here and for participating. And I look forward to doing that with the focus on comprehensivity from CJ's perspective, and see how that goes.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.